Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So this video is going to be from my Twitch channel where I actually spoke for an hour with EA gameplay developer Ben Ross. He is the head gameplay developer, so we discuss a number of topics including, the meta, skill zoning, servers, all of that. It's a full hour long, so a little bit longer. If you guys want to pause it and come back to it, that's fine. But I did get a lot of requests for the full thing to be uploaded. So here it is, guys. If you enjoy it, let me know in the comments section down below. It was a blast and an honor to, have EA ask me to do one of these talks, and I hope that we can do some more in the future. Thank you guys again for watching. Hope you guys enjoy.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Obviously, awesome opportunity to be able to kind of have kind of candid conversation like this, and I know the community is always looking for this kind of thing. So yeah, great for it to sort of have an opportunity to make it happen. Yeah, so for NHL 22, sort of, I guess my official title was I was a producer responsible for gameplay. My role going forward has shifted a little bit, but kind of my job is about the same. Lead designer for gameplay, and also getting more involved in sort of the World of Shell ESHL side. But having been on the team for a long time, and with a close-knit team, always kind of consulting in all those areas. So for those who do know me and see me sort of chatting on Twitter, or for sort of our Game Changers groups and sort of those that kind of talk through there, I'm interested in improving our entire experience. So although I'm not like the expert in every single area, and I'm sure there's tons of questions people have around the whole game, obviously I'm most qualified to talk to gameplay. But yeah, always trying to take all feedback so that I can help kind of get those things in front of the team and see if we can improve things.
No, absolutely. And I got to give you props because you never shy away from a debate or something on Twitter. So, I mean, you got to give respect where respect is due, and we do appreciate it. So, let's just talk about, like, first, you guys jumped to Frostbite this year, and now you've seen, maybe people don't know, you actually do watch, streams, you play the game quite a bit, and I'm just curious, like, with the jump to Frostbite, have you seen where it's going to need continue, like, the things that you're going to need to focus on gameplay wise, or things that you've enjoyed so far that you've seen from, community level and gameplay level? What are the things that you enjoyed so far with the Frostbite jump in terms of gameplay, and what do you think that you really need to focus on going forward?
Yeah, so I guess sort of anytime you go to new consoles and you sort of take on a new engine, it's a huge undertaking, right? It's actually, like, I know the community sort of thinking and sort of getting this type of opportunity. It's kind of like, hey, what are you going to improve? But I do have to give a nod to the team. It was super impressive what they pulled off these last couple of years. We were in work from home. And a console sort of jump and an engine jump is sort of no small feat. So that stuff's crazy. But at the same time, my job is to always look for where we can improve things. So I think that's what's kind of funny too. Sometimes seeing kind of some of the community dialogue, looking like, oh, they think the game's perfect. I'm like, and from the conversations we've
Yeah.
had, kind of within our Game Changer Discord and stuff,
Yeah.
I'm one of the most critical of the game. But I try to be very constructive, because we need to figure out how to improve things, right? It's one thing to call it out, and I've got my own folder of hundreds, if not thousands, of videos of big things, small things that we want to improve. So yeah, when it comes to Frostbite, I think I mentioned it before for those that sort of saw me speak on it, but when the overall sort of visual fidelity of the game was going to improve, we knew that was an opportunity for gameplay to try to stand up to that too. So that's kind of what led to getting the stick in physics. That's a big thing for me. Like, that was a big change to gameplay. There's a lot of positives that come from it. There's a lot of things that we're kind of learning, especially seeing the game in the competitive space. So there's a lot of places where we'd want that to improve going forward as well. But yeah, that's kind of it's a tough question, because I've got sort of ideas, and have heard a lot of stuff from the community that we have pieces that we want to improve kind of across the entire experience. But as you said, yeah, I'm watching streams all the time, so it's that's sort of the best way, I think, for me. Is It's one thing to get written feedback from people on Twitter or isolated clips, but to be able to watch raw gameplay and see how things play out in competitive space, and see people get super elated or frustrated over things kind of in real time, that's when kind of the most truth, I think, comes out, or at least in terms of how people are feeling. And then it allows me to look at things. We all have bias, but I try to look at things a little less biased and go like, okay, this is what they're saying, but this is how it looks. And that's when we kind of figure out like which things kind of like boil up to the sort of the top of the surface, and maybe sort of the most important to look at and improve.
No, for sure. And like, I think it is like obviously with the jump to a new engine, it's always going to be pretty challenging. We're going to get to a lot of chat questions throughout. We've got about an hour here, guys. So I have my man Thrash. He's clipping the ones, some of the more pressing ones. I'm not going to lie. I'll give you my thoughts on the gameplay. I mean, this is my third, I think it's my fourth year being a game changer. This is so, I've been through a couple of the games so far. I'm not going to lie. This is probably the one that has changed the most. I think that the meme of like, this is the same as 21 or the Spider-Man meme of the same game, that one doesn't really apply anymore. It is far different. I will say this. I haven't enjoyed it as much, but I will admit this is the worst I've been. And that might play into I'm self-aware that maybe if I'm not winning all the time, I'm not going to have as much fun. That being said, with the stick in physics, personally, like I'm gonna give this is my own personal, not chats, but my own personal thoughts. Like it feels recently, and maybe we can talk about this well because the tuner that changed the game. I'm sure that you got some thoughts on that. It feels. I don't want to say clunky, but like that's how I describe it. And I want to know, is that because of like stick and physics still needing to be worked on, or is that it looks like you guys tried to make this year a lot more sim based. You turned the pass intercept model back on, and it looks like to create offense in space now, it's a lot more reliant on setting up plays. I know my man Kesso unfortunately couldn't be on today, but he would basically be, he's kind of the poster boy of it because he loves, figuring out the strategies and things like that. Was that your vision to make it more sim based this year? And do you think that's led to more challenges or different challenges that you guys have got to look at going forward?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think like it's we're always looking at things of like sort of what's good for the game, but being grounded in the reality, being a licensed product, representing a real world game, we always have to look to the real world. And even when people comment on the game, like sometimes we get stuff from sort of competitive players um, that is a little bit more related directly to the game. But quite often people will post clips and they're relating it back to reality, right? So that's always going to ground us trying to build something that's realistic like this. But we are still, especially for the online experience, putting out something that needs to work in a 4 minute period game. And I think even before stick and physics, when we were doing like what we sort of referred to as incidental contact, right? Like so stick on leg collisions would cause you to lose the puck. That was really just trying to reward defenders for being in good position. So I think whether you were building an authentic hockey game or you're just kind of creating some sort of fantasy sport of some kind, you want to reward defense. So I remember days playing the game competitively back in kind of like I don't know, maybe like the 08, 09 days. Like it started as far back as that. And like I've played the game forever since like the early 90s, since the first one. So I know there's people in the community that reach out all the time that have been there from the start. Sort of a nod there, actually. I laugh sometimes when people say, oh, I've played this game forever. I've played it since NHL 10. And I kind of go like that makes me feel pretty old. But but I know that you joke about that even about yourself.
Yeah.
But I make you look like a young guy. So yeah, so when it comes to that kind of stuff, we uh, we look at the real world and we say like, okay, well, like what makes positioning matter? Obviously, a player can't just skate through and keep control of the puck. Or we can make those decisions, right? Some of the classic video game choices that were made were to allow that. Um, but that's when we see people kind of getting into more two-dimensional gameplay, kind of like a player can just go into the corner and then skate through the middle, regardless if there's defenders there or not, and tuck it in. So I think that that's sort of where those concepts came from, is wanting to kind of reward defense and not necessarily being like, oh, it has to be a precise poke check that hits the puck. If you're standing there, you should be rewarded. Then when it came to stick and physics, it was trying to improve the overall fidelity of the game and try to improve realism. But it was also confusing for players to look at game rules around, like if the stick just goes through a leg and that's why the puck comes free, as opposed to seeing that physically happen. Or we saw a lot of clips last year of players flying down the wing, losing the puck based on that logic, but then being able to acquire it back again. And because you don't see the player get held up with their stick and have to kind of swim around that player to get the puck, you're kind of reliant on just trusting the game's logic to say like, oh, for this many frames, the player is unable to pick up the puck again. And I think that there was enough of that kind of stuff that even for players who were really in tune with the game, playing it competitively, that it was like, let's give this a shot. We actually have the tech now, and we have kind of the horsepower to be able to try and pull this stuff off. Now is the time. And I think that um, people sort of quote Rammer from quite a few years ago where he said, "Oh, we've tried stick and physics and it breaks the game." I think that like people maybe understand some of that now of like, oh, okay, like it does disrupt the game, and when you are playing a 4 minute period experience, and when you look at the real world sport of hockey, how much time the puck is spent kind of in the corners and battling it out and that kind of stuff, players getting tangled up, that there is a lot of nuance that has to go into it with players being able to avoid each other and recover from their sticks getting held up and all that kind of thing. So yeah, it's definitely driven from both the competitive side, making sure to reward stuff that's deserved, um, and making sure to reward defense for good position, and then just trying to make sure that people can understand these things visually, and they don't have to kind of have to understand the kind of the nuance of game mechanics that we've made up to say like if a stick goes through something, then it's kind of blocked out for a moment in time. So yeah, kind of a culmination of all those things.
Let me ask you this, because this is always going to be one of the like the bigger debates about what people actually want from the game. Do you think that a more sim based as opposed to more arcade version is more desirable? I guess it's tough to answer, but for your opinion on it.
Yeah, it's tough. I think it depends. Yeah, in terms of my opinion of sort of the community, I think that there's pockets of everything, and that's what's pretty cool about it. And that's what I've tried to stay true to for like on my days on the product, is to make sure that we can preserve everything from like an arcade to a full sim experience. And a few years ago when we expanded our gameplay sliders, that was with kind of more of the what I call kind of the operation sports sort of audience, like
Yeah.
those who kind of really get into franchise and post their detailed slider sets and stuff like that. I really wanted to make sure we could offer something for folks that wanted to kind of spend that time and share those details of how they could tune the game to get a 20-minute period experience or something like that. Personally, I love that kind of stuff, but I also love competitive online gameplay. So I've always played like online versus and played in leagues before there were leagues. And like I said, I date myself, but like the second you could kind of dial up against somebody and play like just like modem to modem through dial up, we were running leagues through like makeshift like BBSs before the internet was even really going. So like when people joke about or when people talk about lag now, I kind of joke like they don't know what it was like then, right? So I've kind of seen a lot of that, I guess. And when it comes to my opinion, I've actually had fun playing like competitively, but playing like threes style gameplay, which like I would say is much more two dimensional. It's very arcade based.
Yeah.
Um, but where I sort of navigate towards is more the sim based sides of things for sure. But having been on the product for a bunch of years and taken a bunch of feedback from players, trying to find that balance, and again, if something that works in 4 minute periods, you're obviously taking creative license. People should walk away from the experience, in our opinion, going like, oh yeah, it was just like a hockey game that is like when I'm at the rink or watch on TV. But it obviously can't be exact, or you would need 20-minute periods, or all the scores would always be 1-0 if you're only playing 12 minutes of gameplay kind of thing.
Let me ask you this. All right, let's talk about hockey ultimate team. That's the majority of it. So let's talk about the tuner that happened. Okay. It
Yeah.
I don't think it went as everyone hoped, but from a gameplay standpoint, everyone is under the assumption that it was game breaking, and the revert back to beta memes were all out there. I'm sure you've seen it. Talk to me about what you think changed, or what your thoughts are in terms of how you combat developing a game that that has an ultimate team aspect where ratings change, and how that implement or how that affects gameplay.
Yeah, so there's a ton of pieces there, and I talked to the designers and producers on Ultimate Team a lot, with the crossover, with just sort of the impacts to gameplay, and some of the feedback that I get specific to gameplay, and then trying to ask players, okay, well, what modes are you playing, and whether they're playing in ESHL, whether they're playing against human or AI goalies, whether they're playing Ultimate Team, and all those things weigh in. So in terms of core sort of design concepts for us, I've always wanted to kind of ground something with a base. So we design the gameplay around our base rosters. So they would work for like offline play now and core franchise and online versus, and then sort of leave it to those on the modes team for World HL, ESHL, and HUT to sort of design their progression or how they want to.
Oh, might have lost him. 1 second, fellas. 1 second. Tech difficulties. Give me 1 second, fellas. Hang on. Let's try it again.
Oh,
Can you hear you? I can hear you now. Sorry. There we go. All good? You got back?
okay.
There we go. We're back.
Yeah. I don't know if it seemed like my other computer is not even linked, but I don't know if it went off or something. Yeah. So anytime that the game is sort of evolving,
Yep.
it's it is tough on the gameplay side to be able to say, oh, it's going to work exactly as it did out of the box. But at the same time, I look at that as kind of being part of the design, right? So if you are getting attribute progression within Ultimate Team, ultimately these players are going to get better, and people need to feel those things. So some players have reached out and said, well, there should be different tuners for HUT than there is for ESHL, or the game shouldn't necessarily be tuned for the regular rosters. But it's hard to say that, right? Like if the reason why it shouldn't be tuned that way is because of attributes getting better in Ultimate Team, that's sort of to say that the attributes won't mean as much, or that the game will only be tuned for when players get up into sort of the 97 to 99 range of an attribute. And on our side, we want every attribute point to matter. So whether you're playing with teams in the CHL, or you're playing teams in the NHL, or you're playing with players over in Europe, that you get the spread there, and then we rely on those creating the rosters to make sure that we get the proper player differentiation and that kind of stuff. So that's, I guess, just a little bit of background in terms of like why we design a certain way, and then leave it up to the modes teams in terms of sort of what they want that progression to look like. In terms of what that means when you're when the game kind of comes out at launch, and what that means through the history of the game as it changes, and sort of what happens during patches and this kind of thing. Yeah, I just want to be perfectly honest. There is that we saw overall sentiment to be really, really high from sort of the original tech test and at launch, and we had no intentions to change anything. So I actually had players reaching out to me saying like, "Well, poke checking is too powerful, and we can't score these types of goals anymore." Or it seems like players aren't fast enough. We're getting caught on breakaways, like whatever it was, stuff all over the place. And I was just saying like, no, we're sticking to our guns here. We're not going to tune anything, because people will adapt to the game, right? Like a lot of people had struggles with passing early on. We made some big changes there, and that was with last year's sort of comments around cross crease and wanting to expand the skill gap within the game and all that kind of stuff. So we were kind of like, well, let's wait and see when people get more games under their belt. Let's wait till they play it more competitively. Let's wait till we get some like competitive HUT champs weekends and stuff like that in. And sure enough, there we were. Like it was sort of, there's always lines in the sand when these patches come out. But in 1.2, other than bug fixes, we didn't change anything. And I know that people in the community are saying like, like it's not true. We can feel this thing, but we've seen this many years, right? Like it's not new to this year where people point to a line in the sand with a patch. And I definitely don't deny that people feel differences or that things have evolved, but it's not necessarily always due to the patch, right? Like the progression of the game changes as people do sort of get better at the game, and they play it more. There's also sort of like trying to progress through and playing lots of games and getting into kind of their own sort of patterns and sort of repetition and stuff, that like there's just so much that can lead to the game feeling differently than what some kind of call that honeymoon phase within the first couple weeks of the game, when you're just kind of playing it to enjoy it and figure it out. And then you have a patch that comes out, and we did have bugs in that patch, right? We had the presentation issues after goals, which caused some of those soft locks. So then the tuner that came out only had one change in it, and it was to address that problem in the only way that we had available to us. Because when you put out a patch, you have to plan these things well in advance, and it's like code or logic changes and stuff like that. And there's a big process to get it approved through first party and through all our testing and everything. And because of all that process, it was obviously disappointing that those issues made it through. But that sometimes happens in software. And like I was up to the wee hours of the morning trying to find some fixes and talking to some of our engineers who eventually found that CVAR that we could change in the tuner that would basically be a workaround for us while we continue to look and see what we need to do to get around that change. So for those who saw it, we've got a patch coming out like a 1.3. And the big highlight there so far was roster sharing. So I know people are excited about that, but that patch should also start to solve some of the issues that we're seeing in presentation in the post goal moments. And like that's obviously something that we want to change right away. I think people were kind of like, oh, why wouldn't you roll these things back? But it's not that simple. If it was, obviously we would do that kind of stuff. But there's a lot more that goes into the patches that some of those things are needed. So it would be creating something brand new. So that's sort of where I don't know, just being kind of open about kind of how that process works and why it's not as simple as it maybe looks on the surface to kind of turn those things around. But like I said, I was right there on the kind of ground floor going like, what are our options? What can we do? And just as much as anybody obviously want the game that people were reaching out going like, hey, the game's fun to play, but I can't play it. But then the patch comes out and people are like, oh, you ruined it. And there's nothing tougher than people saying you ruined it when you don't know what to change. Like there wasn't like we really fixed a few bugs. There wasn't any plan on the gameplay side to do anything for 1.2 or even this coming 1.3 other than fix bugs. So now that the community has been very vocal about the game being different or being sort of as harsh as saying, oh, it's just 21 again. We've looked at things really closely and said like, hey, well, regardless if that was because of the patch, right? Like we believe it's not because there isn't anything in there that
what would be your
would
thought as to why people would think that? What would be your guess?
yeah. So I what I think it is I think that again, it's players sort of adapt to the game and they sort of move up the ranks in the game. And like this is again from seeing it over multiple years. Obviously, in a single year, something could change in a patch or tuner, and it would change perception, that kind of thing. But we've seen this general sort of idea multiple times, and as if there's some kind of bait and switch on our side where we want to put out this great product to draw people in, and then we're gonna change it on them. For anybody that knows me, like I stick pretty strongly to the way we've designed things, and especially if the community is happy with something, like I would fight tooth and nail if somebody wanted to change it away from that. So in terms of like why people feel that it changes, I think that again it when you're progressing through something like Ultimate Team and you're playing so many games on the weekend, you eventually kind of develop into some of these core patterns. People get better, they figure out how to master the game. Like that's another piece of like when you're saying like our ability to adapt. Reasons why we have put out tuners and patches in the past is that all of a sudden people find ways to score or ways to sort of break the game that were obviously never intended, and we need to keep up with those things. If we didn't find them before launch, then we want to do it after. So again, there's no denying from my side that people actually feel that the game's different or that the game plays differently now than at launch, even if it's due to the way that people are playing or whether it is due to attributes increasing an Ultimate Team or whatever it is. But that's where we want to listen really close to the community and go like, I want to get past the narrative that it was the patch, because I like 99.99999% believe that it wasn't the patch, but I believe that we can do better and improve the game going forward. So it's kind of like, okay, knowing what's being called out now, what do we need to do to improve some of these issues? So like I saw the tweet that you had put out asking for clips around passes getting through, example for the cross crease, and there's legitimate bugs in there. There's never supposed to be a time that you can connect with a one-timer when your stick is colliding with a player's leg, or if you're so compromised in your physical posture because a player sort of draped over you that you can't get your stick to the puck. Obviously, the shot's not supposed to get off. But I believe that those things would have been there from launch, unfortunately, and they're not because of the patch. But we now need to look forward and see if we can fix some of those things.
Okay, well that's good to know. Like so, like those. So like, let me use those as an example. The passes getting through and a one timer being able to get off. Is that something that you guys would potentially patch? Hopefully this year, like in the next little while. Are those? Is that like a main one to look at? Like the stick
Yeah.
and physics
So
ones, because I think that would be a stick and physics one because the stick is now a separate layer from the player.
yeah, it's related. Like last year, we had logic to say like if on the contact frame or the frames before your stick was going through a stick or through a leg, that we would not allow contact with the puck, or that we would have you lose the puck, that kind of thing. Now that we have the stick in physics, it should recognize those scenarios and it should hold the stick up. And if it doesn't, it's actually still supposed to fall back on the old logic to make sure we preserve that game balance. So in the places where that doesn't happen, that's just a bug. And I don't say just a bug meaning it doesn't matter, but it's a bug and not like an intended thing. Those are some of the bugs that hit me the hardest because I wanted it to be so balanced. So yeah, in terms of going forward, we can never guarantee that we're gonna have a fix. Like when we see some of these videos, we try to recreate them internally, and we have to get like repros of these issues. Should have got some water. And we should get some like repro cases of these issues on our debug machines, and if we can, then we can normally solve anything. But some of these are actually really, really tough to reproduce. So when we get videos, right, like we all see them. But if you go into practice mode or something and you're trying to force this over and over and over again, it's actually tough to get a repro of these things. So again, that's what we're working on, but I can't guarantee it until we get a fix.
Let me ask you this. So one of the other things, like one of the biggest changes to NHL 22, the pass intercept model being turned on, but the other one is making passing essentially a skill rather than just automated for the most part. Do you think it's currently working as intended, or do you, from your personal play, because I know you play the game a lot, do you think that there are some improvements that could be made or some things that are maybe not working as you intended?
Yeah, so there's some things not working as intended, like when those passes get through and defensive players are making the right play, and it's not getting broken up. That's not intended. In terms of like the reaction time, all those things are intended. So those are subjective tuning for sure.
I want to jump in there real quick because a lot of the
Yeah.
clips that I've been seeing, because I asked, I personally am not seeing. I use the Seth Jones quick pick animation that we saw in the trailer as an example because that's like just hyper. Looking at it, it's a very very highlighted play where he moves his skates together to knock it out of the way. Is it because when you have a situation where two players are pretty close together and they're forcing it through, or just there's a player in between? Is it because of the pass speed and maybe that is just at a high level really overtaking any sort of ability to make an animation? Is there like a speed at which the pass at some point where the player will ignore it, or is there something else that might be causing that, like you think, that would allow these passes to get through?
Yeah, so it's a culmination of a bunch of things. So reaction time does play in. So we kind of have a human delay on how soon after a pass even the best player can even start to attempt something, right? So that's where players would want to, if they feel like their reaction time is going to be below a certain level. You even see players in the real world NHL like lay down to block a pass lane, or sort of get down in a knee to block a lane, so that they don't have to rely on their own reaction time to get a skate or a stick to the puck. So that's where that's modeled in. And then after that, depending on where the puck crosses them, we have a number of animations that represent all the different actions that a player can play to get their skate or a stick to a puck. They all have various times to get there. And then that goes through a player's individual attributes. And then we also have the X factors on top of that that make players more exceptional, faster. They have more range, so they have more animations at their disposal to have more reach or get pucks out of the air with more fidelity, that kind of thing. And then in some cases control the puck better too. So after they get a piece of it, can they then pick it up again themselves and make another play? So
Yo, wait, before we go any further,
yeah.
go grab a glass of water, my man.
Yeah,
Go grab a glass of water. I got you. Yeah, we're good. All right, guys. So, okay, what we're gonna get into, I want to, when he comes back, needs a glass of water. He's been talking all hour. The one thing I wanted to bring up is I want to ask about servers. I want NHL Warrior 99 to spamming servers. See, I want to ask because he has mentioned to me why servers are going to impact NHL in a certain way and gameplay. I want him to explain it so that you guys can understand. Player switching, I am going to bring up for sure. And Thrash sent me a ton of questions. I'm trying to look down on them. I'm gonna try and leave like 15 minutes at the end. Thrash has been picking out questions throughout it. I can't, guys. It's not about Hut. Like, he is not the Hut developer, so I just want to make that clear. That's why we're not talking about like specific Hut modes. Why is there no BR? That kind of thing. But player switching is one that I want to talk about. I want to talk about servers for sure. And like I said, Thrash is pulling up some questions, so we'll try and get through There we go. He's back. Okay, 1 second.
Okay, a little bit of relief there.
There we go. Oh, flip your camera or turn your phone. There we go. There we go. Okay, 1 second. There we go. All right. Okay.
Back to action. Not as polished as your setup over there.
It's okay. That's okay. Okay. So the one thing I do want to bring up, and again, I'm not gonna. This isn't like I don't want to make this super about Hockey Ultimate Team because this is about gameplay. But I want something that the community maybe doesn't understand, or we maybe want you to explain a little bit. The servers and the way that it plays on a server-based game. How do you think that? What do you want to see in as improvement for server gameplay, and why? What do you think are the biggest issues currently with the servers and how gameplay is affected with it, in a sense? I guess it's a tough question to ask.
Good question. Yeah, so like I've challenged our team before, like when we've looked at feature stat and gameplay. Sort of, I guess I've been quoted as saying that if we could improve the way the game plays online, like any sort of infrastructure that can make it play more smooth would be better than any feature that we can add to our game. Like it basically makes every feature that we already have in the game better. But that's easy to say. It's really tough in an online space to do it. And some players who are playing multiple games will sometimes reach out and say like, oh, like NHL doesn't play very good for me, but these other games do. And so the infrastructure for NHL is different than some other server-based games. So when you play some of the shooters and things, the way that they handle kind of their server-based gameplay and have things kind of resolve kind of at the server level and send back to players, right? Like players have probably been in games where they sort of get shot or something, and they thought that they were already behind a wall, and the person who was on the sort of the offensive side of that on their screen, they got what they deserved, right? Like they made that connection. So there's sort of pieces there that are different, whereas we can't have a puck that travels extremely fast, but you can still see. We can't have that puck miss the net and then have it count for the other players as having been a goal. Whereas maybe some of the shooters can do things differently in the way they code things because you're not necessarily seeing the bullets in real time like you are a puck. So there's some just core pieces there that I think it's good for people to kind of know that there's limitations for us to have things happen in real time, that you are sending things back and forth to keep things in sync. And I'm not the best person to speak to that technically, but just as a high level, it's good to kind of understand.
I think he connected. 1 sec. I think he connected to his Wi-Fi. He's got to turn off his Wi-Fi. Yeah, like, so what he was talking about, guys, has this been explained? If you talk about, like, Call of Duty, for example, if you talk about, 1 second here. If you talk about, like, Call of Duty, the way that, like, oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, you connected again? It's okay. Yeah, so I think what I was explaining is that, like, so, like, in a game like Call of Duty, the way that you receive, like, you might be getting, 30 or 40, ping or MS or what you would receive in NHL, and it acts way differently in an FPS game that you wouldn't notice, but in NHL, it's far more damning, I guess would be the word. Like, would that be accurate? Like, the way that it's just ping is on NHL is just much more tough on the gameplay?
Yeah, like I said, I think like when you have a game that's coded the way that NHL is, and you're sending stuff back and forth, and you kind of have to get that back before it can sort of play out, then it isn't kind of like your personal connection or your personal sort of game, and then sending something to the server. Both those things have to be resolved before all players are kind of have that, but you still have your personal connection to the server. So the other player isn't limiting you in a server-based game, but you are still waiting for all to come in. So your own personal connection does matter in those cases.
Okay. Oh, your camera kicked off. There it goes.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's all good.
Playing around on my phone here.
It's all good.
It wanted to lock.
Is it good?
This just shows how raw it is.
It's all good. Yeah, exactly.
People were worried about these things being pre-canned questions and stuff like that, but I think my setup alone proves that to be not true.
All right, let me ask you, I don't know if you can touch on it. Do you think that NHL is better off server-based or peer-to-peer?
I love the way the game feels peer-to-peer, like when you get a really good connection.
It does feel like when someone's in your living room. Yes.
Yeah. Like it can feel amazing. But I've also had server games like on sort of the best server, and when I see some of the connections that some people have when they talk about having like 10 ping or something. Like I've never had a server
Oh, dude.
connection
You're
where I
talking to
am
one
that's that
province.
low. Yeah, but I think that I've had some really good like ESHL games where it feels like offline to me too. But peer to peer in the best case scenario feels great. But like everybody knows who's played that, right? Like I've played competitive in online versus and kind of wondering if the player on the other side is my camera cutting out again or is it
Yeah,
fine?
the camera's just cutting it, but it's all right. It's okay.
It's because my phone's locking. That's why.
There we go.
There we go. Does it have the right orientation?
Yep, you're good. If you want,
Okay.
take a second if you want to turn it off the auto lock.
Yeah, let's do that.
Good. Yeah, so okay, so like the one thing, yeah, so like cuz a lot of people that at least in the competitive space like much prefer peer to peer. Do you think that there's ever a possibility of going back? I guess you can't really talk about that.
Um, yeah, like I said, like there was a bunch of reasons why it went that way. From the online competitive balance perspective and for consistency. Like that's what I was gonna say with peer to peer. I've been playing against players before where um, you're kind of wondering like, are you downloading something on the other side, or is there somebody in your house watching Netflix,
The
or what's going
potato
on? Like,
modem.
yeah. So you can get sort of negatives there too. But I think that yeah, I don't know. There's a lot more that goes into what would be the best thing, and I think that some of the issues that happen around kind of the IP booting and all that kind of stuff was big enough, especially as the game got into the competitive space and they were looking at like GWC and um, sort of just how important all that would be, sort of for those qualifiers. I think was probably part of that as well. But again, it's not really my wheelhouse to know sort of what's better there. But in terms of a player, I think that as long as we continue to work on good connections and we have added new locations and stuff like that, it's possible that that's still the best way to go, as long as we can continue to improve it.
No, for sure. Now, the other, let me ask you this. So I'm asking very specific. Well, there's one more specific thing about gameplay, and then I'll get into like kind of what you want to focus on. But okay, I have never noticed it until now. Player switching this year. I brought it up in the Game Changer chat, and chat has been kind of spamming it as well. I don't know if there's something that was unintended, or do you feel that there's something that could be addressed for player switching? And maybe, if possible, do you see a way to maybe make player switching better, whether go to the FIFA model where you have a button, the button system where you basically hit R1 or L1 and then all the buttons show up for the player, so you select the one you want? So quite long-winded question there, but is there something wrong with player switching this year from last year? And do you think that you'd ever look to change that in the future?
Yeah, so personally, I haven't noticed it, but we take sort of all that feedback and try to figure it out, and that's why sort of like when we were talking to you about it the other day, and I've heard other players kind of comment on it. But we've also had players for like every single year, I would say, that wants like changes within player switching, and it's tough because when you're doing the contextual player switching, then that will always be subjective. So we've even talked about having a feature where players could um, change kind of like how it biased. Like, do you want to have a more conservative or more aggressive switch? Meaning, like, do you want to more aggressively switch like goal side, even if you'd be like way in front of the player, or do you want to be the closest player to the puck, even if that means that you're kind of chasing them and that kind of thing. So it's possible to give players more control, and then that's sort of where the manual switch came in. And why we chose the manual switch that we did was that it was basically a choice to either have it or not have it. If we went the button route, because you need to have different button callouts for each console, and then you'd need to handle logic for if one of those players went off the ice, transitioning that button to a different player, or if you were playing multiplayer and one person selected that player rather than it just not allowing you to select it, we'd have to again move the button around and then handle the cases on if you were expecting to press A to get that player and then that switched to somebody else. So like the pros and cons of doing that and not doing that, it just had like a bigger laundry list of things to do. But doing something that explicit was our one of the first things that we tried, and we had a prototype of it actually internally, and it was promising. But because we could get the directional switch in, we thought we would start there and see how that benefited players, especially because there was some key moments where players wanted a manual switch. One of the main ones was like when your defender or when the puck is in the corner and you don't want to be the closest player to the puck, and you like you're more worried about that thread on that pass in front, so you might just switch to the player that's out in front of your net. And it was like, if these are that specific, then players could either use the I believe the last player back switch will give you the player in front of the net once you're already in zone, as opposed to down the ice. I'd have to try that again, but that was something that we thought we could give players if that was what they always wanted,
So
without having to implement the full button switch.
if they hold down R2, because like when defending the rush, you hold down R2, you'll get the last man back. If you're in a defensive zone, that will give you the player in front of your net.
That's the intention, and
Okay.
it's actually quicker than that. You can hold R2 and then click R3
Okay.
right away. Because
Really?
before you had to hold R2 for like a length of time, but now that holding R2 gives you access to the right stick, it's indefinite, right? And then so you can either flick there with your right stick, but by clicking in R3, that gives you last player back right away. And I believe that we did add logic for the player in front. So I don't know. Now I'm saying it to everybody in the community. So
Well, we're all gonna try.
quote
That's something that people did not
quoted,
know.
but
So like this could be
yeah.
that could be a huge thing. All right, we're all gonna try it out. If that's the way it's intended, that's the way
Yeah,
intended.
we'll see. I'm sure I'll find out pretty quick whether it works.
If
or not.
not,
But
we're getting a
that,
patch. That's
it's
what I'm
things
hearing.
Like that. Yeah.
Okay, well
Signing
there
up
you
for
go.
more work.
All right. So one of the other things that was pretty prevalent early on was checking. Do you think now currently? So I think that one of the things that was harped on about a gameplay change, I think that early on was that on that I don't know if it the one tuner or one patch, there was something that addressed checking. Do you think that checking is currently working as intended, or do you personally see, whether it be in competitive streams or just playing your own, do you think it is as intended, or do you find times or specific moments when you think that hey, we need to work on that?
Yeah, there's like, if you ask me about any single part of the game, there's always parts
Well,
that
yeah, that's
I would
yes,
want to
yeah,
work on.
yeah.
But in terms of general balance, and actually maybe that's something worth getting into right now, is that sort of intention and direction versus sort of the reality or how things turn out, right? Like when sometimes people will post a bug or something and say like, "Oh, I can't believe that they would do this," or like, "This is embarrassing," or like things to that level. And yeah, it sucks sometimes when some of these issues happen. But like, for example, like a puck going through a goalie's pad, it's obviously not the intention or the direction. And when we've played and stuff for like thousands and thousands of hours of gameplay without seeing something like that, but then you get sent a clip, it's like, like it's possible, but we need to figure out how to repro that, or why that's happening. And then when it comes to more subjective things like poke checking, we wanted defense to be really strong this year. We took the overall feedback from players in the community that they wanted to see players play active defense against the puck carrier. And like, we hear people talk about skill zone all the time. We can maybe get into that in a minute. I have my own thoughts there,
Oh,
but I think
we would love to hear you talk about the skill zone,
yeah,
Ben.
yeah.
Okay.
So we'll get into that. But I think the goal was really, can we encourage manual defense? So it was like, if AI players can defend pass lanes, so again, having the disrupts back turned on, and having more at their disposal to be able to pick off these passes, could could the human player be more active on the rush and kind of disrupt zone entries, or rub players out against the boards, again, and using an active stick? Obviously the penalty logic changed with stick and physics as well, and it was all done with intention that a player could be more active with their stick, but still hopefully get penalized in the cases where they deserve it. But we wanted to see offensive players drive through sticks, and some of the things that we've never had in our game that we do see in the real world NHL. And I think all those things combined, the game in general is playing to expectation. We want offensive players to work for goals. But has it been interesting seeing the sentiment change from poke checking is overpowered, to some players saying, "Oh, it's changed now. It's underpowered. It's not working." Um, and that's where I wonder, sort of like, where the skill gaps are, where some of the really good players are learning how to move the puck more, keep their feet moving, not just kind of go into a glide, because you won't trip if you're in a glide. You kind of have to keep your feet moving now, whereas it's really hard, unless you kind of dive to take out a player's legs. You're not going to trip them when they're gliding, right? And players got really used to just holding the puck out and protecting away, but now you're allowing the defender to be very aggressive with their stick when you're doing that. And in that, we saw some videos sent in to us of players kind of from behind a player poking through a player's legs. And that's something that, like, in a specific context, we're like, that's not really what we intend when we say that poke checking should be strong. We often talk about good body positioning, being in front of the player, or if you do get a good angle and can get a stick around a player, It's less about kind of being able to poke between their legs. But again, that should be more risky as long as that player keeps their legs moving,
You,
right? So we've seen more tripping penalties as a result as sort of the years gone on versus early on of people kind of skating around and really going into glides and protecting the puck a lot in the early days with the game. And I think that's something that's kind of evolved over time too. And then we have improved things in the patches with stick and physics or the collision detection and things like that. So that will change things a little bit too. But that was more about sort of flush contacts with the puck and stuff like that. If anything, that would have made poke checks better.
okay, so like the one thing you said that was very interesting that people might not pay attention to. So you're saying that if a player enters a glide, you're not gonna get tripped. So you're more
Yeah, like if
susceptible to get the puck knocked off because they can, I don't want to say spam it, but they can hold it and be more aggressive with a poke check because you're not moving your stick. So you're saying that to draw more penalties and play against players that are really spamming it, maybe you're going into a glide more than you're paying attention to. So like if you're skating nonstop, you're gonna draw way more penalties. You know, if someone's spamming it.
yeah, and like we've simulated things like with the stick in physics where like a stick is going to glance off the outside of a leg versus if you like we had some of this logic even in our detection of sticks going through sticks or legs where we would recognize the difference between the stick going through the leg from like the inside to the outside versus outside in, and that was always kind of simulating what we felt would happen if the stick was actually in physics. But now that it is, you can have your stick on the outside and a player can drive through that, or your stick will just glance off their leg. Versus if you pull their stick or get your stick between their legs and pull it from inside to out, you'd be more likely to pull them off balance or make them fall. And if they're skating, they have less balance. And you'll tie up their skates with your stick more than if they're gliding. So it's not that it's completely impossible to happen. It's just they're a lot stronger in those poses, and I think that that's what we see in the real world sport as well. Like way more poke checks are glancing off legs when that player's like in that sturdy base, and you basically have to decide: am I going to protect the puck and stop moving my feet, lose that speed, or am I going to keep skating and maybe not protect the puck as well, but get away from that player. And then potentially, if they are poking from behind, you're going to draw more tripping penalties as well. So it's taking nods from what we see in the real world and then trying to create game mechanics and logic for what the physics system is sort of reading in terms of the strength between stick and legs and skates.
Fair enough. The other kind of like thing that I'm seeing asked a lot here is it appears, and again, talk to me if this is a stick in physics thing, but there's a lot of like the stick getting stuck and causing limbs to go in all sorts of directions. It's kind of what I would deem like the clunkiness that it appears. Do you think that that's a result of a stick in physics, or is it working as intended?
Yeah, that's I lost you again.
It's all good. You're here.
Sorry.
It's just, yeah, you go. Yep.
We'll keep making it work.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's definitely a result of stick in physics. And players have to like one thing they don't have enough of in the game right now is the ability to kind of preemptively avoid getting into those scenarios. So it's kind of on the player to kind of skate or move their defensive skill stick in a way that it's not going to get tangled up on players. So some of that to me is some of the situations are realistic, right? Like allowing an offensive player with the puck to drive through you and move your stick versus retain good body position or control where your stick is will sometimes get you into those compromised positions. But then there's other times just because there are players kind of skating through traffic or you're in near the boards. We're trying to have the stick not go through the boards as much now, so your player is actively playing kind of some avoids or recoveries or however you want to look at it near the boards, or when their stick does get tangled up, they have ways to kind of windmill their stick back or tuck it through, or they'll relax their upper body to turn their stick so they can pull it through a crowd. The amount of variance that you'd need there for the amount of positions that players would get into the real world, like we don't want to be dropping sticks all the time, so we've tried to make them recover as much as possible. But just like in the real world, a player could skate through really fast and put my stick behind me. Maybe I would have to drop it once there's enough stress on my shoulder, or maybe I would find a way to kind of like tuck it in and pull it through. Whereas our players just have to continue to. Sounds funny to say, but they have to kind of learn how to do that better, and we have to give them more tools, more animations to know when to utilize those. So like I said, some of it is definitely as intended. There are definitely edge cases where it's kind of like, oh, that player doesn't look as athletic, or they're not preemptively trying to avoid that situation from happening. Um, but like personally, I believe that the pros far outweigh the cons, but it's definitely something that we want to improve further.
Fair enough. One of the more go-to goals this year that hasn't been in the game in quite some time is like and I'm sure you've seen it, is like the backhand, just walk out from behind the net and throw it in. Like, do you think that that needs to be addressed, or is it maybe in a future patch coming? Is it something that you're focusing on, or do you think that if that goal was allowed or that player was allowed to get into that situation, that should go in?
Yeah, I think sort of a few thoughts. So in terms of, oh man, sorry, I keep
It's all
losing
good. It's all good. No worries.
you. In terms of overall direction, when we have to choose sort of one thing or the other for the goalie, I've always kind of stood that I want the goalie to defend the pieces that are sort of less defendable. So, for example, if they're quick to come off their near post, it's much tougher for somebody on the defensive side to defend that than cutting across the net. So when we had players that were kind of back skating towards the middle and then tucking it up short side because the goalie would kind of cheat over, um, that's much tougher to defend. So when you think of kind of the relationship between the goalie and the defender, we sort of said, okay, well, the goalie's got the puck and they need to worry about their short side, and it's on the defender to kind of stop the passes or stop those players from getting in front of the net. So just in terms of overall direction, that's why that kind of plays out that way. Um, we could add some more variance, and we could also add better logic in terms of like when a player has really started to commit that way to get the goalie to push over. You'll see a lot of that stuff in breakaways. If you like a really strong move, a goalie will preemptively go to save, and that's where you can kind of tuck pucks back 5 hole, or you can kind of go back the other way and sort of really leave them out to lunch. So that stuff does exist in the game, but we didn't necessarily want it to be up to that, whether it's like, oh, sometimes the goalies are just going to really cheat off their post, because then that's still giving up a goal that is not defendable by the player. And then I think that the other thing with AI goalies is we see players, especially on breakaways, they will switch into their goalie often. So it's interesting to see from like a player skill perspective when they recognize some of these things and can switch into the goalie and make a play, or what are they doing on the defensive side to prevent it in the first place. So it's less about, in reality, would that goal get scored all the time? Like I actually see players try it watching streams, and they do get robbed now and again, right? But it is still a very high percentage goal when you get there, and I think that it's,
If
I
you're
guess it's
allowed
more
to
about,
get there, if you're allowed to get there, that's on the defense. Not, I can
yeah,
agree.
I
I
think
can
from a
agree
game
with a bit.
balance
Yeah.
perspective it is.
Okay.
But I wouldn't mind like good goalies getting over there more. But even saying that, like I said, I still see people go like they expect it to go in, and they're like, oh, like I got robbed. And it's like that's where the better rated goalies, or maybe they didn't get as much speed or didn't quite get their angle right or get the shot off properly, um, that it isn't working out for them, right? But it's definitely been a high percentage goal, as we've continued to weight the goalies being stronger on the short side.
Okay. All right. This is more of a focused question in terms of like attributes. If you wanted, say you are someone that wants to hold someone off the puck, okay, what would be some of the attributes you would look at that you would prioritize?
Yeah, so balance is definitely one of
Like the
the,
balance stat. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
balance is one of the biggest ones, because that's sort of your counter from an attribute perspective to the body checking. Sort of when it comes into like the physical hit and the relative speed of the hit, the angle that it's happening at, um, where you have the puck positioned relative to you. So if you're moving the puck such that you're getting hit towards the puck, that's far better than getting hit away from the puck, obviously. So like all those things come into play, and you see really skilled players have mastered that, and I think that's why people are like, oh, like there's these hit bubbles or these kinds of things, and really it's players doing a really good job of kind of manipulating their player's path to kind of lower the relative speed, or turn like a flush hit into a glancing one, and that kind of thing. But if you do have sort of more body weight, higher balance, those things are both going to um, help the player quite a bit in terms of just like not getting shoved off the puck. And then puck control helps, and puck control and offensive awareness help how quickly you can kind of respond after you do lose it to regain it back again. So when you see players kind of fly up the wing and lose a puck off their stick or get shoved off, and then they can kind of reach back and grab it quickly, or quickly play like a skate pickup or something, those are the players that usually have high offensive awareness and puck control, because we allow them to basically react after their own puck loss to be able to reacquire again, or at least attempt to pick up.
I've got a great question here. Matt Foster says, "Ask Ben what his strats are for versus."
Yeah, I've always used overload quite a bit, and
Okay.
I play an aggressive forecheck, um, and I leave my biases on my forecheck to neutral zone right in the middle. I let the game logic kind of decide, and the way that that works is that once the um, once the game is kind of decided that the forecheck is kind of for naught and they're going to break out of the zone, then they'll sort of fall back to a neutral zone system, or if the puck is in as deep in the zone when they're trying to play into it, they'll drop back. But I play like a blue line neutral zone system, but ultimately try to play my forecheck as much as possible and very active on defense. Like I really like kind of, again, I like a
Do you switch
realistic
a lot, or
games.
do you control one? Do you try to control one or two people in the defensive zone?
Yeah, so on the rush, I always try to get goal side. I don't chase a lot from the back, so I switch right away. And I'm trying to angle players out. Like for those that saw, like when we did that video last year talking about Josh's
Oh yeah,
gameplay,
I
right?
forgot about that video.
I'm really big on like angling players out and forcing them to their backhand, because that's how we've kind of made the mechanics work, and that's even more so this year, right? Like with the passing being impacted, a player is minimized much more on their backhand when you can get them angled away. Like they're not making the blind passes behind themselves, especially with the velocity and accuracy that they could last year. So if you can get goal side and angle players out and sort of force them to get away from where they are shooting, and it helps your goalie as well. Okay. Sorry, once again.
All good, man. All good. The okay,
Uh,
the one
yeah.
thing.
So that's what I try to do.
No, fair enough. All right, yo. Okay, so you mentioned it earlier. If someone is skill zoning, for anyone that doesn't know what a skill zone is, it's basically where you let your defense or your AI play defense for you. They're the ones that pressure the puck. They're the ones that do all the work in the defensive zone. You're basically sitting in the middle, trying to block any cross creases or just not really doing anything. You're waiting for them to lose the puck, essentially. How do you, or how would you tell the player base to beat the skill zone? What would be your tips for telling people how to
Yeah.
beat
So
it?
as I mentioned earlier, I've kind of got my takes on it, because like playing the game forever, I always played when the AI could fully play, and I
NHL
liked the
18.
idea.
Never. No, we don't want the AI Preston holding up against the boards again.
Yeah, and I think that again, pros and cons there in terms of simulating the sport.
Mm-hmm.
Players who are kind of dancing in the corner deserve to kind of get double teamed, but I think a good human player can switch and kind of angle you out, and then switch into another player and kind of aggressively take you off the puck and that kind of thing. But I liked, like what I liked the most about the changes was that the AI was no longer sometimes taking penalties and stuff when I felt that I didn't have to be aggressive and wanted to kind of wait for a play or wait for the puck carrier to commit or something. Then your AI would go in there and take like a hooking penalty or something. I
Yeah.
like that it's 100% on the players now. Um, but in terms of kind of skill zone, like I still see it as there's a couple things from the community, and again, I'm sure people will get heated about this kind of stuff. But when I see people kind of angry when the goalie passes the puck out and people put it back in,
Oh,
like with what they
dunking.
call,
You're talking about
yeah, what they
dunking.
call dunking.
Okay, yeah.
When they get angry at that, or they get angry at skill zone, to me it's kind of like top competitive players kind of creating a narrative to kind of like accuse somebody else for something that like hinders what they want to do, right? There's kind of like there's a little bit of like a bullying aspect to that, to go like, no, like I should be able to pass the puck with the goalie, we just want to keep the game going. But that player will fly down the rink and take their odd man rush if it supports them. But if the other player takes the puck and scores on them, it's like, oh, it's a bad thing. And the same thing with skill zone. If you want to come into the zone and get forced to your backhand and curl in the corners looking for a pass, it's like, is it really on me to have to chase you, right? And I think that there's two pieces there. I really want people to need to play manual defense, but I don't think that they should have to chase you to do that necessarily. It's on the offense, in my opinion, to force the defense to have to be concerned about them. So I think that a lot of players pass up a lot of good shot opportunities, shooting through screens, shooting from the high slot and stuff to score, looking for one timers. And if playing what people call skill zone, kind of collapsing down, um, shuts them down, it's kind of like, I don't know. I'm kind of on the fence about whether that's actually like a bad thing or not, because I think that there's a reason why it's worth keeping speed on a rush and not like it's tough to score 5-on-5, right? Like you have to string some passes together, get the defense moving, get them out of position. If you allow a defense to set up against you, it should be difficult to score.
Yeah.
So, like I said, it's not that I deny that the AI should be helping you win games defensively, but I also think that in a lot of cases, like there's kind of two sides to that story. I think that an offense should be rewarded for keeping speed and making the defense like have to work. So yeah, that's sort of where I sit on, on that kind of
I
stuff.
respect that. Chat, you heard him. Get good. No, I'm just
Yeah, no,
kidding.
yeah, yeah, not that way.
No, I
But yeah,
respect that.
in terms of what do you do against it?
Yeah.
We've also heard people say deflections are too strong, or like you can score through screens and you score on rebounds. The tough thing there is that people don't give a lot of credit for like you hear the things on like oh D one timers are bad or these deflection goals aren't earned or oh it's just a rebound goal and that kind of thing. But people wouldn't be scoring those types of goals if you were actively pressing the puck carrier, right? There's a lot of turnovers you could be getting at the blue line if you weren't allowing those types of shots. And when you start talking to people about that, they go, "Oh yeah, but if I do that, then I'll leave the slot open and I'll do this kind of stuff." It's like, well, that's hockey then, right? Like you have to choose kind of what you're going to defend and where you kind of want to go against and forcing your opponent to think about different things. So again, definitely not telling the community to get good, but I do think it's worth the community looking at things through a different lens to go
If you
sort of
can't
where your
score
own kind of
because yeah, I see what you're saying.
yeah, where are your own accountabilities to force the player to change up a bit. And it's not that simple, right? Like there's a lot of smaller things that we could be making changes to make sure that both players on both sides of the puck have all the tools that they need when they do want to sort of have control to kind of force their opponent to think of a different look or again to what tools do you have defensively if you did want to play aggressive and that kind of thing. So yeah, anyways, just those are some of the thoughts I had, and it doesn't mean that it's a one-way street at all.
No, for sure. Now, last thing, because you got to go. I don't know if you can answer this either, but is there something that you guys are working on that we will see in gameplay that will change at all, or in the next couple months, or even the next patch, or anything like that? Is there something that you could give a tidbit about gameplay that you're focusing on?
Yeah, so like I said, we've got the 1.3 patch coming out. People would have seen the roster sharing update. That was sort of the big note there. And going back to what I was saying off the beginning, seeing good sentiment out of the tech test and out of launch, we weren't really planning big gameplay changes in the first couple of patches. We were kind of wait and see, and then we thought, oh, maybe we would do a tuner and that kind of thing. But that was sort of the main reason why we held off. So when there was a lot of noise kind of after 1.2 that hey things have changed, the game's not playing the way that we originally liked it. Again, speculations as to sort of why that is. We're now looking at that stuff closer, going like, hey, regardless if those stuff was in there or not, is there anything that we can improve in a future patch? So we are trying to recreate some of those issues on some of the cross crease opportunities where players are able to get off shots when they're more contested or obstructed and that kind of thing. And if we can repro those internally, like I said, easier said than done, but if we can repro those internally, then it's easy to get in front of an engineer that can go, okay, that's why this is happening, and maybe we can get a fix for it. So we're actively pursuing trying to get that stuff, and that's why we appreciate getting clips from the community so we can kind of see these things and go like, okay, that's not just subjective tuning, that's just a bug. And then when it comes to subjective tuning, to your point about like things evolving with Ultimate Team, we can definitely keep an eye on that stuff and go like, well, how often are these pucks kind of getting through, or the reaction time of players relative to these improved passing abilities and stuff like that. We will continue to monitor that stuff and decide whether there should be some subjective kind of balance tuning there. Like, should players actually react faster on passes and that kind of thing. But that's why we watch a lot of games, and I think that's why it's worth kind of chatting with a lot of competitive players to kind of see, like, some are having a lot of success on defense, some shut players out a lot, and there's some players that are having still a lot of struggles to score on offense. So it's, as much as everyone wants to kind of agree that like, oh, like these goals shouldn't go in, you have to look at things much closer than that. And that's where it's been kind of fun to kind of spend some time when I've had a moment on Twitter, kind of breaking down some of the images and kind of doing little telestrator drawings to kind of go like, that's why this is there. But that doesn't mean that we wouldn't increase reaction time, right? Like it's still possible for us to do that. It's just we want to be very certain before we make changes like that. In this next patch coming out, again, because we didn't really plan on those types of things, and just for the community to be aware, you need to get really ahead of things when you're doing patches because there is a bunch of process to it and getting them all approved through first party. So this patch was primarily about roster sharing, and there's some other things in there that was sort of the main purpose. But gameplay does always try to get bug fixes in there. So there's some things we've done for um, like there are some stick and physics improvements in terms of just sort of the fidelity and making sure that it does sort of recognize some of those collisions. There was some poke checks where you could hit a puck and the puck would just kind of like move slightly and not get hit fully. So like there's some fixes for that. There's some human goalie fixes. I'm sure many of you have seen some of the human goalies like on the short side making big kind of elaborate saves when they don't really need to. Those are sort of like when they have low reaction time and then they kind of get above the puck and it hits them and goes in. So there's some improvements to that logic to maybe a goalie would still be beat by a really good shot above them. But they're primarily should remain kind of tighter in those scenarios and not have as many pucks just kind of go off them incidentally and in. So there's some attempted improvements there as well. And yeah, like I say, like any video kind of sent usually sort of makes it past our eyes. So we just continue to kind of monitor those things. And it's hard for us to say exactly what will make it because we can never guarantee fixes. But we're not done yet. And we're still looking at some of that stuff to see if we can further improve it.
I want to say thank you for hopping on and doing this. I want to give a shout out to Clappy for setting it up. And no, it's been a blast. I appreciate it, and hopefully we can do it again, man. But yeah, guys, make sure that you check out and hit up Ben on Twitter whenever you've got a clip, because that's how really like he sees it all. I mean, you do. I'm not gonna lie, you are definitely the one that replies and responds the most, and so we do appreciate it. And yeah, man, thanks again.
Oh, you bet. Thanks a lot for having me on.
See you later, man.